I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for your ongoing leadership over these past difficult months. We're all indebted to you and to the officers for the countless hours that you have devoted to the welfare of our shul and to our community. Welcome to one and all, even from a distance. It's wonderful to see so many faces and see so many names. Extra credit for those of you whose video is on. And yes, we do keep score. It's wonderful to see many of you on Rosh Hashanah, and I hope we'll see many of you in the coming days on Shabbos and Yom Kippur. These are heavy times for our community and for the world, so I wanted to begin by playing a little game with you. You know, Yosie Siegel is coming out with a new book of quotations. I want to share with you a quote that's not in his book and ask if you can identify the person who said it. If you have a guess, just punch it into the chat. You can chat, share it with everyone. You can share it with just Rabbi Buchler. And if you guess right, you win a prize. Okay, here's the quote. The salient psychological fact of our times on this eve of the new year is the almost universal feeling that we have lost control of our lives, our future, our destiny. Contemporary man has begun to believe that he no longer directs the course of events, that the tides of the times carry him along without consulting him and without asking his leave. Okay, so no pressure, but any guesses? I see some people taking me up on this and making guesses in the chat. Okay, there's some good guesses here. Rabbi Sachs, Rabbi Lamb, Rabbi Young. Keep going. Albert Einstein, I like that one. Ooh, Rav Soloveitchik. Okay, excellent. These are great. Keep going. Okay, I'm not going to give it away just this second. If it occurs to you, just punch it into the chat. So before we get to the answer, a little Jewish history. I've shared source sheets. The email went out. The link to it is in the top of the chat here. And at various points, maybe I'll put up some of the sources by sharing screen, but we have so little time together. I would much prefer to see one another than look at just words on a page. But every once in a while, I'll share the source. So I want to share with you a story that maybe is familiar to you. One from the 19th century and another from the 20th century. In the summer of 1831, and these sources, I hope, will give us a little perspective to frame the issues that I want to think about tonight. In the summer of 1831, the second of 5 19th century cholera epidemics struck Europe. After its appearance in India, the disease spread west, eventually from Russia to Poland, and then to Prussia. It soon moved on to the British Isles in North America, killing hundreds of thousands of people. Okay, and I want to zoom in on the Prussian town of Posen, what is today Poznan in Poland. If you're in Berlin and you head due east, halfway to Warsaw, you get to Poznan. Very old Jewish community. In the 19th century, conflict was already brewing between the Haskalah and the traditionalists. That's for another time. Posen's chief rabbi was an arch-traditionalist and a master Talmudist named Rabbi Akiva Eger. The base medrash, Rabbi Akiva Eger, is a household name. We use his svarim all the time. When the epidemic hit Poznan, it was the summertime, but it was still raging when summer turned to fall, and the community was faced with the question of what they were going to do for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I want to share with you just a short excerpt from the writings of Rabbi Akiva Eger. Okay, this is what he said. He said, Ze emet she'akibutz b'makom tsar einu nachon, aval efshar lispalo kitos kitos. He says you shouldn't have big gatherings. They were worried about contagion. They were worried about the spread of the disease. Better if you just gather in small groups and everyone can daven in shifts and take turns. So he says, here's what you should do. B'chol bate kinesios hein be'ezras anashim hein be'ezras nashim mutter yeh b'Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim litvos rak es machzis hamakomos. I'm only allowing shuls to be filled to half capacity. Men's section, women's section, you can only fill them to half capacity. The idea is that every other seat should be empty. ועל כן, רק מחציס מבעלי מקומות בבתי הכנסס יהיה להם גישה לבתי כנסיות בימים הקדושים האלה. So as a result, every seat had an owner. Every person had a makom kavua in the shul. So functionally, this is going to mean that half the people can't get to shul on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So he says, I want to make sure that everyone can get to shul. It's a democracy. There's no priority, there's no preference, there's no special privileges for any member of the community. Everyone is equal before Hashem. Everyone gets a seat. So we'll divide it. Half the community will get to come to shul on Rosh Hashanah, and half the community will get to come to shul on Yom Kippur. We'll have a lottery. You get a Rosh Hashanah ticket, you come on Rosh Hashanah. You get a Yom Kippur ticket, you come on Yom Kippur. Poznan, 1831. Fast forward now to London, 1939. Okay, let me put this up on the screen. Hopefully, you'll be able to see it. Just give me a quick thumbs up if you can see the screen, and I'll try to enlarge it just a drop. Okay, this is a letter that was written by a man called Rabbi Maurice Liu. He was the rabbi of the Highgate Synagogue. I think today it's called the Highgate Shul, and it's just north of downtown London. September 10th, 1939. Here's what he writes. Amid all the woe of the present time, let us not for one moment forget our faith in God and our adherence to his laws. We shall, with his help, celebrate the festivals, and my appeal to you is to gather regularly in the synagogue that collectively we may pray to Almighty to save us and our dear ones, our king and country, from the horrible devastation of war which is raging in our midst. Okay, this is September 10th. September 1st, Germany invaded Poland. September 7th, the Blitz began over the skies of London. I enclose herewith the usual timetable with the number of your seat on the first page. Naturally, the timetable, as printed, will not be adhered to. Following are the times of the services in accordance with the instructions from the chief rabbi. Evening services on Rosh Hashanah, 6 p.m. will be sure to be done 30 minutes before it gets dark. Rosh Hashanah mornings, the service will commence at 8:30 promptly, as they must be concluded not later than 10:30 a.m. Members are requested to say Shachris at home, as the service will commence with the reading of the law. Please attend in time. Kol Nidre night, there will be no services in the synagogue. Yom Kippur Day, the service will commence at 11:30 and end at 1, begin again at 5:15, end at 6:30. The shofar will not be sounded at the end, as the fast does not terminate till 7:37 p.m. I'm glad to state that some of the honorary officers are air raid wardens, and all advice will be given in case of an air raid warning during the services. Please bring your gas mask. It is sincerely hoped that all members will be inconspicuously dressed for the duration of the war. Top hats should not be worn for synagogue. Okay, I especially wanted to share this with the members of the Jewish Center and to just assure you that this topic was raised at an officers' meeting, and we came to a decision about whether or not to wear top hats during the pandemic. Okay, the letter concludes. May our new year bring victory and peace to our nation, which is the bulwark of justice, liberty, and freedom. May it bring prosperity for the needy, health for the sick, safety and security for us all. May God preserve the children who have been taken from our midst. They were already evacuated from the city, and restore them to us in peace and happiness. God bless you all. On behalf of the honorary officers and committee, I remain yours sincerely, Maurice A. Liu, Minister, Highgate Synagogue, September 10th, 1939. We think it's all unprecedented, but there are precedents. Part of the challenge that attaches to feeling a loss of control is the sense that we have no anchors. No one has done this before, so we're grasping and lurching because there's no playbook for these kinds of phenomena in our lives. So it's worth reminding ourselves every so often that what we're feeling is not in fact new. Everyone's looking for answers. Our Masorah is the most extraordinary repository of wisdom, and there's very little that we won't find there. So who uttered the words with which we began? Who captured the sentiment that so predominates our zeitgeist? We definitely have some winners here. I'm looking through the answers. The answer is not Woodrow Wilson. It's not Einstein. It's not Mordechai Kaplan. It is Rabbi Lamb. Jordan Rosenberg, you win a prize. Rabbi Lamb, Rosh Hashanah, 1968. It was Vietnam, it was the 60s, it was a time of great upheaval and uncertainty, and it was the notion of feeling powerless. Powerless in the face of global challenges that rose to the fore. 52 years later, the world may have changed dramatically, but the feelings with which we grapple are exactly the same. The topic of who's in charge, or what we own, is one of the great themes of Yom Kippur. The problem is that the message of the day seems to be entirely contradictory. On the one hand, and this is what I want to sort out in the time that we have this evening. On the one hand, we sing this beautiful song, Ki hine kachomer biyad hayotzer, and we give a dozen metaphors. We're putty in the hands of our Maker. Hashem, it's all up to you. We're just yours. B'chol ba'ei olam yavrum lefanecha kivnei maron. Based on the Gemara, we include this in our tefillah. We say it in the Nisan Tokef. Hashem, we're passing you by like sheep pass a shepherd to be counted. We're just passing through in this world, and you'll judge us. You're the ultimate arbiter. There's a Gemara in Brachos that says, Rava, the Amara, used to daven, and at the end of davening, he added his own prayer. What was his prayer? He used to say the following words, and they'll sound familiar. Rava Basar Tzlusei Amar Hachi. After his tefillah, he used to say the following: Elokai ad shelo natzarti eini chedai ve'achshav shenotzarti ki ilu lo natzarti. The words sound familiar because we say them over and again on Yom Kippur. God, before I was created, I was nothing. And now that I've been created, it's as if I were never created. I haven't done anything. What have I contributed? What have I accomplished? I'm so small. I'm so puny. I'm so powerless. Everything we say is in the hands of Hashem. We're very small, and our fate is entirely up to the Almighty. And on the other hand, we say, Shuva, Utzvila, Utzdaka, Mavirin, Esroa, Hagazera. There are levers we can pull that signal that we are in control. And as the Rambam writes at length, one person can change the whole fate of the world, particularly in the days leading to Yom Kippur. We talked about this recently in our 5 minutes of Shuva, learning Hilchos Shuva in the Rambam. Listen to what the Rambam writes. Aseh mitzvah achas harei hechriya es atzmo v'eskol olam kulo lekav schus v'garam lo lahem teshua v'hatzala. You have to imagine that you as an individual and the world as a collective are both hanging in the balance. You have some merits, you have some demerits, and one good act could tip the scales for you and for everyone. What an extraordinary testament in our theology to the power of human agency. We are in control. So we do have levers to pull. We can make a difference. We can alter the fate of the world. It's a big philosophical question, but Yom Kippur is a big day. And what constraints do we have? Kiddush isn't for another 39 hours. So how do we reconcile these competing forces? Just what is it that we're saying is in our control and what is not? To look for a resolution to this question, I want to do a little learning with you. There's a biblical character that very subtly comes up over and over again in the Machzor. And the character I have in mind is Yosef. Yosef on Yom Kippur. Maybe he's not the first person to come to mind, but once you see the references, it's hard to escape the sense that he plays a very prominent role on this holiest day of our year. Okay. I'll just pull up the source sheet for a second. I'm going to be looking at sources 7 and on. Okay. If you have the source sheet handy, let's see if I can scroll down here. Sources 7 and on. Just have a look with me for a second. You'll see the pasuk tells us. This is the brothers and Yosef. We know the story. They took his coat and they slaughtered a goat and they dipped his blood they dipped his coat in the blood of the goat. Now look at the Yom Kippur service, the avoda, and the resonances. What does the Kohen Gadol do on Yom Kippur? Source 8, V'shachat esir chatas asher la'am ve'avi es damo el mi beis laparoches. He's also slaughtering a goat, and he's also taking that blood and using it in the service. Somehow a connection to Yosef. Now, there's a very key ingredient in the Yosef story, which is at some point the brothers are willing to confess that they've done wrong. Yosef has them in a holding cell. Say, we really blew it all those years back. We threw our brother in a pit and he was crying out and we didn't listen. And I guess, that was a real mistake. And what's the key elements of the avoda on Yom Kippur? It is, as we know, the hisvada alav es kol avonos bnei Yisrael. The Kohen Gadol confesses the sins of the Jewish people. We know that Yosef's coat was a ketones, which is one of the special garments that the Kohen Gadol wears on Yom Kippur. Remember, we just sang this on Rosh Hashanah. We'll sing it again on Yom Kippur. Maybe we didn't sing it. We just said it. Vayisayu kol in the Chazar Sashatz, in the repetition of the Shmona Esrei of Musaf. And there's a line, I bolded it for you, toward the end of the first paragraph. V'atu shchem echad le'avdecha. What's a shchem echad? Sound familiar? It's familiar because it's a almost direct quote of the bracha that Yaakov gives to Yosef at the end of his life. V'ani nasati lecha shchem achad alachecha. Lots and lots of connections. I'll give you one more. This one is from Avigail Rock, who's a wonderful Tanakh teacher in Israel. She says, look at the Mishnah that describes the service. The Mishnah tells you what the actions are of the Kohen Gadol. I just bolded them for you. In the interest of time, we won't go through the whole thing. What does he do? Pashat, Yarad, V'taval, Allah. Those are the 4 active verbs, right? He takes the robe off and he goes down and he immerses and he comes out. He says, if you just look at the Yosef story, this is Avigail Rock. If you just look at the Yosef story, they're all here. All these words, Pashat, Yarad, Taval, Allah, I bolded them for you. You could see in source 14, Vayafshitu es Yosef es kutanto, Vayalu es Yosef min abur, Vayitbalu es ktonis badam, Yosef horad mitzrayma, on and on. Yosef is back and referenced implicitly, explicitly in the text. Most famously, Ela Eskara, the 10 martyrs. It's all prefaced, it's all framed in the context of the sale of Yosef. Again, we won't look at it in depth right now, but it's all there. So why all these references? Why all these references to Yosef? Okay, this is the animating question that I want to deal with in the next few minutes. If Yosef is so central to the liturgy and to the machzor on Yom Kippur, there has to be some really compelling reason. I want to see if we can figure out what it is. Now, one reason might have to do with history. So just to say a word of background, I'm going to share with you a quote from the Book of Jubilees. The Book of Jubilees belongs to a portion of literature that we call the Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha, non-canonical works. They're as old as many of the books in the Hebrew Bible. We knew about them. They were learned works. They were important works. Some of them were candidates for inclusion in the canon, but they didn't make it in. The Book of Ben Sira and the Book of Enoch and the Book of Judith and the Book of Maccabees and the Book of Jubilees. We know these books. We have them. We've heard of them. We've studied them. They're not in the canon, but sometimes they are very revealing. A lot of what we know about Hanukkah is from the Book of Maccabees. Again, it didn't make it into Tanakh, but it's also a book. So in the Book of Jubilees, the story of Yosef and his sale on the part of the brothers is told, and it's retold with a couple additional details that are not in the Torah, that are not in the version of the story that we know from any other source. If you have the source sheet, I'm not going to pull it up, but I'll just read it to you. This is source number 16, and you could even look at source number 17 if you have it handy. The Book of Jubilees says the following. It tells the story of how Yosef went to visit his brothers in Dotan. And it says that they dealt treacherously with him and they formed a plot to slay him, but they changed their minds and ended up selling him to these Ishmaelite merchants who bought him and brought him down to Egypt. He was sold to Potiphar, and everything corresponds exactly to the text as we know. And then let me just read you the end of this section. And the sons of Yaakov slaughtered a kid and dipped the coat of Yosef in the blood and sent it to Yaakov their father on the 10th of the 7th month. What's the 10th of the 7th month? Yom Kippur. 7th month is Tishrei, 10th day, Yom Kippur. And the book of Jubilees then goes on to say that on some level, all of the tshuva and kapara that we're working on Yom Kippur is an attempt to somehow make amends for that fateful mistake which happened on that day, on Yom Kippur, before there was such a thing as Yom Kippur. So on some level, Yom Kippur is the anniversary of the sale of Yosef. Then maybe the reason is just historical, and we could leave well enough alone. Possibly. I want to suggest something different. To the extent that there's some kind of forgiveness or reconciliation at the end of the Yosef story, that also fits nicely with the themes of Yom Kippur. But I want to suggest another possibility. I want to introduce another dimension, one that gets to the core of the message that I want to share with you tonight. And it begins with the recognition of this very simple observation. For the first 30 years of his life, Yosef has no agency. He's the object of his father's affection. He's the object of his brother's jealousy and hatred. He's the recipient of dreams. He's not interpreting them, he's just receiving them. He's stripped of his special coat when he arrives to visit the brothers. He's thrown into a pit. He's sold into slavery. He's purchased by Potiphar. He's set upon by Ashes Potiphar. He's thrown again into a dungeon. He has no control, no agency whatsoever. Everything happens to him. Everything happens around him. He has no say. His life unfolds almost exclusively in the passive voice. And that's the operative feeling of this pandemic. All the things we used to control are out of our control. Our calendars are empty. What can we fill them with? Our travel plans are canceled. Where can we go? Our life cycle events are postponed. They've been reduced to Zoom. Our health and our well-being are unknown. There's a constant looming anxiety about whether we or someone we know might get sick. On Yom Kippur, we come face to face with this reality. We are not in control, like Yosef. It's not us. Hashem is in control. Kechomer biyad hayotzer. Unisana Tokef brings it right home for us. Mi yachye, mi yamus. I can't speak for anyone else, but I can tell you when we said the words last year, mi ba magefa, who will perish in a plague? I thought to myself, that's who we are. It's not relevant to our times, but we leave it in the machzor because that's what we do. We preserve texts even if they don't really belong in this time. They really belong to another time. Here we are a year later. And tragically, we know the answer to last year's question, mi b'magefa. Events of global proportion are beyond our control. Hashem controls them. All our vulnerabilities are laid bare on Yom Kippur. And it's not just in the liturgy that we declare that Hashem is in charge. It's in our conduct too. We're fasting. We're wearing these white garments. The Ramah says they're bigdei mesim. They're like tachrichin. That's how we bury a body. Those are the shrouds that we bury a body in. We're not wearing shoes. We're face to face with the fact that we're fragile human beings in a dangerous world. And remember the Rambam, the amazing Rambam. The Rambam, Hilchos Shuva, Perek Beis, Halacha Zayin. I'll just share it with you. This is source 18 if you have the source sheet. It says, Yom Kippurim, Huzman Shuva L'kol, Yachid L'Rabim, V'hu Kates, Mechila, Slicha L'Yisrael. Yom Kippurim's the end of the line. It's the deadline. It's the time for everyone to do tshuva. It's the time for forgiveness. You got to get it in by Yom Kippur. Lefika chayavim hakol asas tshuva lisvados b'yom kippurim. You gotta do tshuva, you gotta confess on Yom Kippur. U'mitzvahs vidu Yom Kippurim shiyaschil me'erev hayom kodem shiyocha. But the Rambam says, oh, and by the way, you should start doing confession, you should start doing that erev Yom Kippur. You know why? Because you never know. The last meal you're going to have, 5:30, trying to get, someone could choke, they won't get to Yom Kippur, they should make sure you do vidui on erev Yom Kippur. What a thing to think about. Well, we might not make it to the Pesach Seder, let's have a little matzah on erev. Just remember, the Rambam says, we could die at any time. Wow. Only Erev Yom Kippur would we ever say such a thing, because it's at this moment when we come face to face with the fact that our lives in this world are not really in our hands. And so Yosef is the very personification of Yom Kippur. He's Yom Kippur incarnate. We keep coming back to him because he embodies the whole message of the day, the essence of the day, this notion that Hashem runs the universe and we are all very, very small. Now, we could end right here and call it a day. It's a very powerful message. The life of Yosef and the day of Yom Kippur are of a piece. They ask us not only to consider the fragility of life, but to remember that at the end of the day, we control very little. It's Hashem who's the Borei and the Manhig. He's the one calling the shots. But I don't want to stop here. Because Yosef reminds us that even if the big things are not in our control, that doesn't mean nothing is in our control. What's amazing to notice is all the control Yosef does retain, even when he's reduced to the very lowest rung of society. Think about two types of people who have less agency than anyone else in the world. If you ask me to say, I would say it's the slave and the prisoner. They control nothing. Yosef is both, and yet he manages to be a source of bracha and success to everyone around him. But there's something even more stunning. Yosef is a Baal Tshuva. Even as a slave who's convicted of high crimes and misdemeanors and thrown into a dungeon, he never loses control of his ability to change who he is. Once you see it, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's hiding in plain sight. Let me pull this up on the screen for you. If you have the source sheet, it's source number 19. Okay. Remember when Yosef is a youth, he's a kid, we learn three things about Yosef. Okay. Not in order, but I bolded them for you. You can see them here. Source number 19. This is after Yosef has been, this is after we've been introduced to Yosef at the beginning of Parshas Vayeshev. First, Yosef first thing we know about Yosef is he's a tattler. He tells tales about his brothers. Second, he's vain. He obsesses about his appearance. Kidei, Rashi says, he wants to look a certain way. And finally, Yosef chalom, he's a dreamer. His head is in the clouds. He doesn't think about how other people are going to perceive him, which is how, by the way, he could make the mistake of showing up to Shechem wearing the coat that was the source of so much fractiousness in his family. He was so self-absorbed that he was oblivious to the impact of his actions on anyone else. Fast forward to the interregnum. He's not the viceroy, he's just a slave. You'd think he has no control, no agency. Except he manages to change everything we know about him. He had an issue with the words he used. Now the way he talks is nothing less than holy. Vayehi Hashem es Yosef, the pasuk says. And Rashi says, it's obvious to everyone that Shem Shamayim Shagur Befiv. He's always talking about Hashem. And when given the chance to prattle, he's silent. He could have defended himself and told the real story about what happened in the situation he found himself in with Eshes Potiphar, but he never does. He doesn't do that anymore. He's gone from prattler to prophet. The vain teenager tried to make himself into an object of desire. Now he resists temptation. Rather than betray the trust of his master, he chooses virtue over vice in place of vanity or values. And the dreamer who never thought about anyone else. Now that's all he thinks about. That's why wherever he went, the Torah tells us that he found chen in the eyes of other people. What does that mean? What's chen? Not just that he was charming. You know what chen means? It means something very specific. If you have the source sheet, it's source number 20. Torah tells us, Perek Chaf Beis in Shmos, if you have to borrow something, if somebody needs to take a pledge, so as a collateral, Torah says if you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you have to give back the same day, because maybe that's his only cloak. He doesn't have anything else to wear. So what else will he sleep in, the Torah says? And then the pasuk ends with the words of Hashem, Veshamati, I will hear them, ki chanun ani, because I am filled with chen. I am compassionate. Chen means you care about other people. Their distress registers with you. Narcissism has given way to empathy in the life of Yosie. If we're telling ourselves that things are out of control, we're just looking for a way out. You know, there's an old story about the Goldbergs. They're celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary. And at the party, everyone wants to know, how do they manage to stay married for 60 years? I mean, that's a 6 decades. It's amazing. And little Mrs. Goldberg says, I'll tell you the secret. When we were married, we came to an arrangement. I would make all the minor decisions, and my husband would make all the major decisions. And in 60 years of marriage, we've never had to make a major decision. And that's the message of our times. The little stuff is in our control, and it's actually not little. How we speak, our capacity to bring God into the world. How we make sound decisions even when no one is watching. How we deal with yes, either capacity of the best. I'm going to share a picture with you. Rachel and the kids spent part of this past in the town next to an apple. This is from May. Anyone who needs it, I'll be leaving some healthy sack lunches on this table for you if you're hungry and need to eat. Made with love by a neighborhood mom in a clean and sanitized kitchen. I'll leave the table up 11 to 1:30 p.m. Can't get simpler than that. She found the thing that she could be in charge of, that she could own, and she owned it. To feel as though we're not in control can be very scary. Let me share with you an excerpt from a beautifully written piece in The Guardian from this past August. This is by a woman called Melanie Chang. She writes the following. She says, when I was, if you want to follow it in the source sheet's 21. When I was a kid watching horror movies all those years ago, I confused the exhilaration I felt with true fear. But really, it was just a watered-down version of it, as close an approximation to true fear as fruit punch is to absinthe. I always knew the ghosts in the films weren't real and couldn't hurt me, just as I knew my parents were in the next room at hand to reassure and protect me. The pandemic has shown me that true fear arises when we feel that someone or something has taken control of our fate. It comes when we contemplate our non-existence, when we acknowledge our fragility, our insignificance. We've all had experiences like this. Friend goes to work and doesn't return home. Family members told a cluster of cells has gone rogue. In these watershed moments, our little world is turned upside down. But usually, the wider world carries on. And while we may find this fact incomprehensible, even offensive, in times of personal tragedy, there's also some comfort and hope for our own recovery in seeing everyone else keep going. What is so exceptional, I think this is a profound observation, what is so exceptional about a global pandemic is that the wider world does not carry on. When we stop, the wider world stops too. And in the chance moments we meet at a safe social distance wearing masks and catch each other's gaze, we see nothing but our own fear reflected in a stranger's eyes. It is then that the illusion we have all worked so hard to maintain for so long, that we are supreme and all-powerful and important, finally falters. The jig is up. We were never in control. And there is nothing quite so terrifying and transformative as that. What a chilling formulation. To consider a world in which we have no control is terrifying and potentially paralyzing, which is why it's so important to highlight this distinction. We don't spend a lot of time thinking about theology, but if this pandemic has called into question some of our basic assumptions about how the universe works, then we need to pause and return to some of our most basic sources. Remember the Rambam? The Rambam, source number 22, if you want to follow it inside. The Rambam says, I don't understand. Why is Hashem punishing all those Egyptians? Didn't he promise Abraham that the descendants of Abraham were going to be a stranger in a strange land, and they were going to be oppressed? So why are the Egyptians guilty for oppressing the Israelites? It's what God said was going to happen. What did they do wrong? And the Rambam says, no, it doesn't work that way. There's the general, and then there's the particular, and they're not the same. God may have decreed on high that a particular nation was going to oppress us, but each person gets to decide whether or not they're part of that story. Hashem may be in control of the pandemic, but how we respond is in our control. That's what we own. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah tells us the following. The Rosh Hashanah kol b'ay olam ovrim lifanav kibnei maron. I mentioned this line, we say it in davening. On Rosh Hashanah, all the creatures, all of God's creations, come before him kibnei maron. And the Gemara wants to know, my kibnei maron, what does that mean? Hach yitargimo, and the Gemara says, I'll tell you the translation. Kibnei amarna. It means like sheep, as I mentioned earlier, like sheep coming before the shepherd. Or an alternative explanation, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel kechayal shel beis David, or maybe it means like the soldiers in David's army. And this was Rabbi Lamb's solution. I'll share with you what he said toward the end of that sermon in 1968. That is what we are judged for as human beings and as Jews, whether we submit to the pressure of events like mindless sheep in a flock, or whether we are willing to stand up and exercise our wills and determine the outcome of the battle like soldiers in the legions of David. Will we be sheep, or will we be soldiers, faceless members of a flock, or dignified sons of David? Reinhold Niebuhr usually gets credit for it, but the great Spanish poet Solomon ibn Gabirol once said something very profound many centuries ago, source 25, the summit of intellect is perception of the possible and impossible, and submission to what is beyond its power. Some things are beyond our control, and some things are within our control. It's when we confuse the two categories that we set ourselves up for disappointment. This pandemic will last as long as it lasts. To bemoan that reality is an exercise in futility. Our energies would be better spent finding those things in our lives that are in our wheelhouse. Maybe a shorter list than it used to be, but everyone has a list. I'll conclude with one final story. 1980s, a friend of mine, let's call him Chaim, visited the Soviet Union as part of a mission to aid the refuseniks. He was put in touch with a young man called Sergei, who lived in Moscow, and the two of them spoke on the phone. Sergei was very excited to hear that Chaim would be bringing Jewish books and other Jewish paraphernalia that he couldn't get his hands on in Moscow. Chaim wondered where they might meet, and Sergei suggested a location. I'm going to be teaching a Hebrew class there, and I would love if you would come. It'll run from 7 to 8, and we can talk after that. Chaim made his way to the address and sat in the back of the room as he watched Sergei begin to teach the Aleph Beis. And when Sergei reached the letter Zion, he suddenly announced the class was over and they would resume next week. It was only about 7:40, and Chaim wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Why were they stopping early, and why at the letter Zion? Chaim went over to Sergei and asked him what was going on. Why hadn't he continued the lesson? Last week, I attended my first Hebrew class, and the teacher only got up to the letter Zion, Sergei explained. I couldn't go any further because I only know the first 7 letters. There'll be lots of things out of our control. We have to seize upon the things that are in our control. Each of us, in our own way, is a font of wisdom and accumulated knowledge. Each of us has a story or a kind word that we can share. Each of us owns a stake in the treasure trove that is our Masorah. We can learn and we can teach. We can daven for ourselves and we can daven for others. We can be recipients of chesed and we can be dispensers of it. Hashamayim shamayim laHashem ve'aretz nasan livnei adam. The decisions that get made on high, those don't belong to us. The decisions that get made down below most certainly do. We make the right ones. We'll be the arbiters of our own destiny, with all the power in the world to make 5781 a year of blessing for ourselves, for our community, and for the Jewish people. I wish each and every one of you a Gemar Chatima Tova.
Very nice.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Yes.
Wonderful.